Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Charles the Band and welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamerspro Show, where we cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, and we give you guys a fresh perspective on things and how we see them. And today, we're going to have a hell of a show for you guys. Before we get into it, please make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to hit every notification, all notifications, to be ensured the second we drop our content, you get it immediately. And be sure to check out the Dreamerspro podcast that we have pinned below. Let's get into this topic here. Now, this is a very interesting one, right? As you guys know, JX My High Roller is probably the biggest. I could be wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb. If he's not the biggest, he must be in the top 3 or top 5 independent basketball content creators on YouTube. The gentleman has been on YouTube, I think, since 2007 or 8 or something like that. And he has been putting out excellent work for literally well over a decade now. This guy, I mean, when you look at his content, he has really well thought out, well put together shows. They're all productions, they're all mini movies, and we all know who he is, right? He's put out a lot of fantastic work over the years. And shout out to him and his channel and his team or whatever and what they're doing out there. But as you guys know, there's been this conversation that's been taking place around the NBA community over the last 2.5, 3 weeks. Now I'll say 2 weeks. Which is centered on, this thing of we're done with the 90s. And I personally think that it was a diversion tactic to get us to stop talking about the LeBron James Balco situation that Kevin Garnett put out there. They wanted it to shift the conversation. And they did so to a certain extent, where essentially you had people on TikTok and others putting together these low light reels of MJ and various players from his era. And then it got to one point where just when you thought these guys couldn't get any lower, they went even now to the bedrock, where they now came out and started saying Michael Jordan couldn't even go left. Or they said Michael Jordan, excuse me, didn't even have a left hand. And it was at that point I realized we are slowly entering into the twilight zone. So JX My High Roller put out this show yesterday. I believe it's at about 500,000 views in 12 hours. And a lot of people have watched it. A lot of people have reacted to it. It's about a 25-minute show. So what happened? People started messaging me on Instagram. Hey, did you see this video? Did you see what JX My High Roller did? Are you going to do a video about it? Then they started leaving comments on the channel. You're going to do a video about it. And then one of our viewers left this long message, an email, just basically explaining why basically trying to prompt me to go ahead and put a show out, reacting to what he had to say. So I said to myself last night, I said, you know what? Okay, let me sit down and start to go through this show, because it's a very long show and you got to watch it. You got to come up with notes because you have to have points that you want to refute. I don't use notes when I generally do shows. I used to do in the past, but it took me so much time to prep. But this one I had to put out, I had to kind of, formulate my notes so I understood the particular points I was going to be responding to. So I went through JX My High Roller's show and I sat back and I watched every point that he had to make, and I came up with my own. And basically, I want to sit down today and refute almost everything that he said and tell him why he was 100% wrong, respectfully, and why I disagreed with every single thing that he said for the most part in his show. So really, that's what I want to focus in on today. So let me get into it here. He said a lot of things. And I want to refute some of the points that he said. He basically believes that, according to what he said, and I could be wrong, but based on what he said, he basically believes that the game of basketball has evolved over time. But I don't think in the way that he means it. What do I mean by that? Instead of saying that the game has evolved, what he should have said is the game has changed. And that's totally different, because evolve gives off the connotation of it's getting better, it's evolving, it's improving, when in reality, the game is changing. But I don't see how it's getting better. And in my personal view and the view of many, the game is not getting better. He said that the talent pool overall, minus the players at the top of the league, is vastly improved, vastly better. And he supported that idea with basically 3-point shooting percentage, the way players dribble, free throw shooting percentage, and fouling. Now, I want to systematically break down every point that he made and basically explain why I personally believe that he is 100% wrong. And I'm going to explain to you why I believe he's wrong a little bit later in today's show. He said that three-point shooting has vastly improved. Folks, the fact of the matter is it has not vastly improved. Here are the numbers over the decades when we're talking about three-point shooting. In the 80s, the league average was 28.9. In the 90s, it was 34.7. You're like, okay, that's an improvement. It's a real improvement, 36%. In the 2000s, it was 35.6. In the 2010s, it was 35.6. In the 2020s, it's 36.1. Going from 35.6 to 36.1, it's not a vast improvement. It's not, at least not the way that he's couching his statements. A 2-point percentage increase over 30 years is not a vast improvement in shooting. It's almost negligible at 2%. You see, I personally believe that the major flaw in his argument is rooted in the premise. He believes that players today are so good because of a lack of defense. I say that the reason players today are so good is because there is no defense. Essentially, what I'm saying is if you inject defense back into the game, the players that you believe are more skilled or more advanced or bigger, stronger, faster, etc., you would see a sharp decline in their production. In my personal view, if players truly were better, what he should have said is players today are so good regardless of the presence of defense. That's when you can say wholeheartedly that players are good. But you can't say players today are so good and also say there's a lack of defense and then attribute it to the fact that players are getting better. There's less resistance. That's just the fact of the matter, and it's a metaphor of life. Whatever you're trying to do, if there's more resistance, it's going to be harder. Period. It's just the fact of the matter. Another point he brought up in his show was that players in the past, the NBA was essentially drafting players in the past that were big bodies that could basically go out there and commit essentially a lot of fouls. But what I personally believe he was discounting was the effect that those big bodies and those players that were out there to essentially foul players was having on the games of offensive players. Now, if you don't believe that physicality or the lack thereof plays a significant role in a player's ability to, number one, execute upon their skill, and number two, produce, then you are totally lost and you don't need to even be a part of this conversation to begin with. If you don't believe what I'm saying is true, what we want to do is support our particular points with concrete evidence. What I want to do is we want to play an audio of Kevin Garnett having a conversation with NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, where Adam Silver himself, this is the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, essentially saying that, listen, the reason that we opted to decrease the level of physicality in the game was because it was impeding the ability of so-called skilled players to go out there and produce. For those of you who may not believe me, want to play exactly what Kevin Garnett and Adam Silver spoke about as it pertains to this particular topic, and then want to come back and continue on the show. Take a listen to what they had to say here.
Is the high scoring working? Is speeding the game up? I asked this with a follow-up because I want to know, will there ever be a time in our lives where the hand check comes back? Is that going? Is this kind of the wave in which we're going now?
I'll answer it coming from the fan in me, which is, and maybe data comes into play here because I can look at television ratings and other measures of interest. There was a point, I believe, probably in around the late 90s when the game became too physical. And I think we lost some of
For our viewers, you mean?
Yeah, and I think for our fans, from the aesthetic enjoyment of the game, where it de-emphasized the particular skill a player had and maybe weighted too heavily physicality, where a big, strong player could come in and prevent a incredibly skilled player from doing those kinds of things. I think of, not that he's a small guy, but a smaller player like Steph Curry can do on the floor. I think that when you think of some of his ability to shoot, his ability to move through the paint, that if guys could just bang him and knock him to the ground, as that was once the case in the league, I don't think that would be a better brand of basketball. I also think we have to find the right balance, because I know when I sit in the stands or talk to friends sometime, they want to bring back, and we've tried to bring back a little bit more of the physicality. Like, I think people like to see hard defense. I mean, it goes a little bit before to what you and I are talking about, like touch and feel. Like, I don't think either people like that idea that guys can go through unscathed and like you're protecting your star players. And in fact, we made some changes this season where sort of, I don't know, the unnatural basketball moves, you know what I'm referring to, and where those were being, players were gaming the system in a way.
Catching on.
Brilliant players playing by the rules had found ways where those were becoming defensive fouls.
So you just heard the NBA commissioner come out there and say physicality can affect skill players like Stephen Curry and others. Now, some of you may be saying, but that's not necessarily true. I need an example of this. Fantastic. I'll provide you one. All you need to do is go back to the 2021 NBA playoffs in the Eastern Conference in the first round, where you had the number 1 rated defense in the NBA, the Boston Celtics, playing against one of the best offenses in the NBA in the Brooklyn Nets, featuring Kyrie Irving, who some believe is the most skilled player ever, Kevin Durant, arguably the most efficient perimeter player in the history of basketball. These guys go into a series playing against the Boston Celtics with their length, with their athleticism, with Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and all of these guys. And essentially what the referees allowed to happen was the referees in that series allowed the Boston Celtics to do what? Play 90s defense, which is essentially physical basketball. And I want to give the credit to Chris Broussard because he's the one that brought up this point. And what happened in that series? If these so-called players, these specialists that are so skilled with all of these three-point shooters, like Seth Curry and all of them are on that team. I forgot the other guy that played for them at the time, another three-point specialist. I forgot his name. If these guys are so skilled, why were they absolutely stifled by that Boston Celtic defense? Why were they stifled? What we discovered was the moment you allow the game to be physical, the moment you allow to touch players, crowd their space, get physical with them, move them off their spots, is going to affect the way that they play. And what KD was not used to was that level of physicality and a lack of space. And you saw his numbers plummet in that series. So when you inject 90s defense into this current era of the NBA, you begin to see players struggle. So what does that make you think? Then when you think about players in the past, in the 2000s, 2010s, that were averaging 28, 29, 30 points per game, what does that say about those players that were actually able to go out there and score those points? Wouldn't one be able to surmise that those guys were actually more skilled and tougher than players today? Now, if you don't believe me, I want to point to another audio, because we like to use evidence to support all of our points, of Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, speaking to Floyd Mayweather about the lack of physicality in the NBA during his playing days and how it makes it hard for players to defend players because of the freedom of movement and the lax defensive rules. For those of you who never heard this clip, we want to play for you. It's about a 20-second, 30-second clip. Take a listen to what Kobe had to say here, and then we'll come back and give you guys our closing thoughts. Take a listen to that there.
But listen, over there the rules kind of different. I think when the ball be like on the rim, you can like
knock it off.
Okay, that's what I thought.
That's Europe. That's why, you know what though? They let you play over there too.
Yeah, you gotta really get fouled.
Over there. They let you play.
You really gotta get fouled.
You know, out here they change the rules up and shit. You can't even touch them.
Right.
Don't touch them. It's crazy. You know?
So you still traveling with him?
So you heard what Kobe Bryant had to say. Kobe was a 12-time all-defensive player. 12. Kobe's made more defensive teams than LeBron and Kawhi Leonard combined. That's how good Kobe was as a defender. And you heard what Kobe Bryant said. He said you can't touch them anymore. So anyone with sense that listened to that information will understand that the reason players today score more is because you can't touch them. Notice I didn't say it's because they're better. I said it's because you cannot touch them. Let's go to one of the next point that he brought up. He brought up a point about how players played. I want to point something out. He talked about stylistically how guys move and all of this stuff. The question I have to ask to JX, My High Roller, and others: if refs actually called traveling and carrying, how many turnovers a game do you think these guys would be having? How dirty would the game look if every other play a player was being called for palming the ball? Wouldn't there be a lot of low light reels of, look, this guy can't even dribble the ball without carrying it? He lacks the fundamentals. What do you think the NBA game would look like if they actually enforced the rules? A person that pointed this out was Tracy McGrady. Tracy McGrady, who was one of the most skilled offensive players to ever play in the NBA, said they are allowing players to travel. And if you can travel and palm the ball and carry, you can do a lot of things that those guys in the past couldn't do because they were playing within the rules. These guys are not. Why aren't you bringing this point up? You conveniently left that out. Another thing he said was, in terms of why he believes this era is better, was that he said the way players turned over the ball, it was higher in the past, which means for whatever reason that maybe these guys are clumsy or whatever. The question you have to ask yourself, the question beyond the question of, well, they're better, is why was that the case? Why were players turning the ball over? And he is correct. Players in that era were turning the ball over more than they do today. The question is why? To me, the answer again is quite simple and is based off a simple observation. When you pressure the ball and there's more resistance to ball handlers, you will get more turnovers. In fact, a steal is literally a turnover. Quite literally. And that's why, on average, teams average more steals per game 3 decades ago than they do today. He conveniently left that information out because he knew a lot of people would not do the research. He also heard his argument, in my personal view, by saying that players in the past played in much more structured offense, playing it with sets and all of that. The fact of the matter is teams in the past play within systems. And teams today play what Kobe Bryant liked to call accidental basketball. So that wasn't a good point, and I think he actually hurt himself by bringing up that point. I think he actually worked against himself by bringing up that point. Here are the facts. As we currently speak, American born NBA players are falling behind. These are the facts of the matter. International players are taking over the NBA. The question then becomes, why? Why are they taking over the NBA? Are they more athletic? No, because people make fun of Luka Doncic and all. So why would that be the case? If players of today are more physically, and we got to use our thinking caps. If guys today are more physical and more imposing and all that, why can't they stop Luka Doncic? Why can't they stop Nikola Jokic? Nikola Jokic can't even jump off the floor, but they can't stop him. So the physicality, the athleticism that you point to and all of that, it's not really serving you. The last MVPs to win the regular season MVP are all foreigners. And guess what? Again, today is going to be this year is going to be a foreigner. It's going to be SGA or Nikola Jokic. SGA is not an American. He is a Canadian. Canadians are not Americans. They even have a different currency. Don't play that game. Now all of a sudden they want to claim Joel Embiid. Really? You're going to claim Joel Embiid 2 years ago? The brother was from Cameroon. All of a sudden today, now he American? Really? You want to claim him when he's useful to you? Listen, the simple reason why these guys are beating these NBA players today is because they work on their fundamentals and they're taught their fundamentals. That's what Kobe Bryant had to say. Who supersedes anybody having this conversation? His views supersede anyone even talking about this conversation. Pure point blank. The fact of the matter is, we are actually witnessing a regression. And that's what no one really wants to talk about. Not just a regression in the game, but a regression in the attitude and the mentality of players. No one with a straight face would be saying that these players, that the NBA is actually evolving for the better. It's not. And it's one of the reasons the NBA has recognized that they have some serious issues to solve. Hence the reason they're looking to bring back defense, because they know offenses run amok and there's no resistance. So no, players today are not more skilled. The 90s is a better era by any measurable statistic, by viewership, by excitement, by style of basketball. Every single thing you want to include in it, it's better. Players are shooting threes, shooting mid-range, playing in the post today, just a 3-point shootout and layups. I'm sorry, there's nothing impressive with that, with a guy running down the lane with nobody there, and the only form of resistance is a 6'10" center. Please.